Graham, it's a pleasure to be here with you again. You know, one of the I think really most evocative parts of the book is the opening section in which you describe growing up in the north of England and the kind of living in fairly straitened circumstances and the kind of promise that rock and roll represented in that world. I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about that.
In the north of England, I guess it's pretty much the same all over, but you're supposed to do what your dad did. You're supposed to do what your grandfather did. If it was good enough for them, down the mine, in the mill, good enough for you, get on with life. You're supposed to get married at 18, you're supposed to have a bunch of kids, you're supposed to hate your wife forever after that, and then lie down and die. I never was asked to do that by my mother and father. My mother and father always encouraged my passion for music. As Anthony said, I came from a very poor background in the north of England. I read a book recently on Salford, which is where I come from, which is kind of a, Brooklyn to New York kind of distance, from Manchester. And it was supposed to be one of the worst slums in the world. And we had no idea. We had a ball to kick around, Great. After World War II, life in England was pretty bleak. You couldn't even buy candy, you couldn't even buy sugar or milk or butter unless you had a food coupon from the government. It was pretty awful. I found skiffle when I was a really young man. Skiffle is a form of music that, if you don't know, there was a very famous skiffle band in England called the Lonnie Donegan. Lonnie Donegan brought skiffle from America to England and turned on all these kids that finally had something to do. And it was really cheap because you could, if you had a washboard, which everyone's granny had a washboard because that's how they did their washing, you'd put thimbles on your fingers and that was your drum kit, right? If you had a chest with a broomstick and a piece of string, that was the bass. And if you had a cheap acoustic guitar, you were off and running. So we had something that we could do that not only filled in our time, but got us laid. I've actually been a photographer longer than I've been a musician, but I could never get women with a camera. So I picked up a guitar, of course. And I've known since the age of 13 what I wanted to do with my life. I used to practice my autograph at school when I was 13. That's one of the ways that you pull yourself towards your dream. I dreamed of being a rock star, and the way, if you're going to be a rock star, don't you need a great autograph, right? And I just signed a bunch of books upstairs for people that had bought the book. And about a month ago, when I came back to New York City, I had to sign 4,300 autographs. Have you ever misspelled your name? Where does your brain go for that split second? Anyway, my point is that I'm incredibly happy to be alive. I'm happy to still be creative. I have to create every single day of my life, whether it's music or photography or painting or whatever it is I do. I have to create every day of my life so I can sleep at night. I'm having a wonderful life.
One of the one of the sweetest moments in the book, you described, obviously the Hollies took off and we're doing, quite well, but your manager, I think it was kind of just nudging you a bit, saying, look, there's this kid I wanted, somebody wants me to talk to him, could you just please go and talk to him and get him off my back? And you made a visit and came out of it maybe with a couple of surprises. I wonder if you could tell us about that.
We had this manager called Michael Cohen. He actually owned the tailor shop that I worked at. It was called the Toggery. It was in Stockport, just outside of Manchester. And he comes to me one day and he goes, this fucking neighbor of mine is driving me crazy. Do me a favor. She says she has this kid that writes songs. Do me a favor, go and pat him on the head, encourage him, and get her off my back, as Anthony says, right? So we go down to this house. It's kind of a medium to well-to-do Jewish family. The Plastic was still on the furniture. It was one of the, you know, one of those strange houses. And there's this like 14, 15-year-old kid sitting there with a guitar. Now, we're the Hollies. And we know we're the Hollies. We've been the Hollies for a couple of years. And we were kind of, you know, on top of our game there. So we said, okay, kid, you know, give it your best shot. What have you got, right? He starts going, bus stop, wet day, she's there, I say. He gets about halfway through, and I look at Tony Hicks and Alan Clark, who came with us, and we obviously know that we could sing the shit out of this song, right? and we did, right? So we said, thanks, kid, that's really great. We'll take that, you know, we'll have our managers, you know, work out the publishing, la, 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 la. And we get up to leave, and I say, wait a second. You got anything else? And he goes, well, I've got this song. It goes like this. Look through any window, yeah. What? Now it's starting to get weird, right? You know. I said, okay. We're leaving, and we're going to take that one too. So, one last time, do you have anything else? He said, I just wrote this song this morning. I finished it, but I gave it to my friend Peter Noon, who was the singer for Herman's Hermits, and it goes, no milk today. This 15-year-old kid out of nowhere, 3 incredible songs, and Graham Goulman, that was his name, later formed a beautiful band called 10cc.
What a great story that is. One of the other stories in the book that really struck me in terms of, you know, look, from the outside, you know, a career like yours, it looks like, you know, just an amazing, steady rise, you know, no bumps, you know. I know, yes, right, of course. I know that no real life is like that. But one moment kind of struck me where, you know, when you and Crosby and Stills got together, and you're all excited, and you have this incredible confidence about what you're doing. You know, you went and sang your songs for George Harrison and Peter Asher, you know, possibly to get on Apple Records, and they said, you know, sorry, we're not interested. And then you went and played them for Simon and Garfunkel, just figuring, well, you know, harmony singing and, you know, interesting, you know, world-class writing, you know, they'll get it. And they were like, well, you know, they didn't really respond either. You know, could you talk about, you know, these people were, you know, obviously people you hugely respected, and, you know, their response, you know, may have been discouraging. You know, could you talk about, you know, just, you know, working through situations like that?
Well, it certainly wasn't discouraging, because we knew what we had. We maybe spent a millisecond trying to question ourselves, but we knew what we had. When David and Stephen and I first sang together, whatever vocal sound that Crosby, Stills, and Nash has was born in 40 seconds. We didn't have to rehearse for months or years. It happened immediately. And the incident that Anthony was talking about is I came from London to Los Angeles to be with Joni, and David and Stephen were at dinner. And we had dinner, and everything was totally cool and stuff, and David says to Stephen, hey, play Willie, that song that we were just doing, right? That's my middle name, William. All my oldest friends call me Willie. So they sang this beautiful song of Stephen's called You Don't Have to Cry, and it was beautiful in 2-part. You know, I mean, the Buffalo Springfield and the Hollies and the Byrds were really good harmony bands. We knew what good harmony was. They came to the end of the song. I thanked Stephen for writing such an incredibly beautiful song. Asked them to do it again. They looked at each other and they did it again, right? They got to the end of it. I said, okay, do me a favor. Sing it one more time. I'd learned the words. I had my harmony down. I knew how their body language was. I knew how they were breathing. I was right there. As I said, whatever vocal sound that me and David and Stephen have was born in 40 seconds. Stunning. But now I have a problem. I want this sound. It's golden to me. And I realized that I would have to go back to England and undo my entire life. I'd have to leave my band. My friends, I mean, Alan Clark have been friends since he was 6 years old and I was 6 years old. I had to leave everything. I left my bank account, all my equipment. I was getting divorced from my first wife, Rose. I left everything. That was the power of that vocal sound. When you add to that sound the songs that that sound went with, I was gone. I wanted this more than anything. December the 8th, 1968, I left the Hollies, and December the 10th, I was in Los Angeles working with David and Stephen, and never looked back. A lot of my friends said I was fucking crazy. Are you crazy leaving the Hollies, all that money and fame and sex and girls and all that stuff? Are you nuts? But they had not heard what I heard. That's how strong that sound was to me, and to this day, still is.
One of the things... the book is very candid, and there's three-dimensional portraits of yourself and of everyone else in the book. I mean, I think there's a real kind of clear-eyed sense to it. But one thing that you keep coming back to, whatever the difficulties that Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, went through at various points, and where you're feeling like you're kind of standing on a ledge with it, you always come back to the sound that you can create, the music that you can create. Yeah. And I wonder if you could talk about that struggle and, how it played out for you.
I don't have any brothers. So I don't know what that is, but David and Stephen and Neil have been my brothers for all this time. It was a struggle. We have been awful to each other. We have been beautiful to each other. It's always been a struggle. But the one thing that I can say about myself and David and Stephen and Neil and Joni to a large degree is that it's the music that will last. These bodies, they're gone in a few years, maybe even while we're talking. Who knows, right? But it's the music. It's that ability to touch people's hearts, because we have to touch ours first. I can't play you a song, unless it gets through me. And I'm my worst critic, in a good way. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to play you a song that's just fucking meaningless. What's the point, right? Everything I do has to have a reason for existing, or else there's no point. So it has been a struggle. We have treated each other great and not so great. A lot of the trouble came from, insane amount of drug use. Obviously, I talk about it very openly in the book about, smoking dope and snorting cocaine. It's been crazy, especially when Crosby started his, his downward slide into cocaine madness. Because David and I always had we always had an understanding between each other that we would be winners. We'd seen a lot of people go by the wayside and be incredibly famous and then just disappear. David and I always wanted to be winners. And by that I mean not fame or money winners, but the ability to call up and say, I need a studio now, I need tape. Get the engineers. When you lose the ability to do what it is that you do, you have lost. So when David and I said that we always wanted to be winners, that's what we wanted, to keep our hands on the tools of what we do, right? And David was losing it. Excuse me, the national anthem's going on, excuse me. What a crazy ride though, right? But the only thing that's going to be left when we're dead is the music. I mean, we're still filling concert halls, we're still doing good, and we're not fucking Johnny Depp, right? Yeah. So it must be the music, right? And that's the most important part of it. My book starts with the sentence, it all comes down to the music. And I go through the entire 71 years of my life, and the last sentence of the book is, it all comes down to the music, because that's what we're about, music.
One of the right before that last line in the book, you describe writing an email to Neil Young, describing your very kind of personal, deep, heartfelt, carefully thought through feelings about, things that had happened and, I guess where, you hope to continue for the group to be going. An email that Neil wrote back and referred to as, quote unquote, a pile of shit. The other day, however, I saw you perform at City Winery. You mentioned Neil Young was in town. You just had lunch with him. First of all, what were you talking about at lunch? And second of all, just describe that, that kind of emotional ride of that level of vulnerability, that response, and still maintaining that deep connection that you have.
There are many things that we have done to each other that were not nice. And Neil Young is an unbelievable musician. And I both respect him and dislike him for the same reason. And it's this. Neil Young is completely dedicated to his music. To the point where if he doesn't feel it, it's not going to happen, right? So let's say you want to book a tour of Europe, and you get your crew of 30 people, they all rearrange their lives, they all get ready to go, and a week before Neil says, nah, I'm not feeling it, man, we're not going. That's okay for Neil, and God bless him for following his muse so strongly. But there are other people involved. That's the part that pisses me off, is the fact that, if you're going on tour and you're going to go and you don't go, it's hard to get a job because everybody else has been booked for the summer tour, right? So all these 30 people have got no jobs, right? And they've got mouths to feed, they've got people to take care of. And so I was explaining this to Neil, and that's what he thought was a pile of shit. My lunch with Neil could not have gone better. Obviously, he hasn't read the book. But we talked about getting back together. Now, we haven't performed together since 2006 when we did the Living with War tour, with Neil. But we're going to work with him in, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks at the Bridge benefit in just south of San Francisco. Neil and Peggy have had for, I think, the last 27 years, an organization called The Bridge, which deals with children with special needs, that can't move any part of their body. But if they can move anything at all, then they're developing technology to help them, access a computer and keep their eye on a certain letter for so many seconds, and that letter appears on the screen. And we did the very first one. We have done 5 or 6 since, and we're going to do the one in October. Now then, I know Neil. This is not all that he has in mind. Because he realizes that the music, here's what's going on. I'm 11 mixes from the end of a 40-song, 3-CD, possibly 4-CD box set of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young from 1974. We did 31 shows. Half of them were in stadiums, and the other half were in gigantic indoor basketball arenas. The average audience was about 70,000 people. You try singing Guinevere to 70,000 people. Oh, we tried it with 500,000 people. Yeah, it didn't work then either. But Neil was unbelievably friendly to me. Not because he wants anything, because he is a friend. We differ in terms of how we want to go about our lives, but he's a dear friend, and I think Neil Young would be there for me if ever I was in trouble. There's no doubt in my mind that Neil Young would be there for me if I needed him. So the lunch this week was incredible. One of the things we talked about is that in 1974, there was no video aid when you go to a sports game. Right now, in the center with those 4 screens and flashing lights, there's video all over the place. But in 1974, nobody ever did that, except one place at the Capitol Center in Maryland. And they had just set up video assistance for sports games. So they filmed us for one night. Now then, it's the line cut, so there's nothing we can do about it. There's no different camera angles that we could cut to if I'm picking my nose or whatever it is, right, you know. And Neil, when I first showed it to them about a year ago, was not happy at all about it. Because in his mind, I think he went back to the moment when we were all totally fucked up. You know, and it makes him uncomfortable. So when he sees the video of that time, that's what he feels like. Me, I don't care. It's 40 years ago, right? Let's get over it. Historically, it's very important in a musical world. This is not Beethoven, it's not Mozart, it's rock and roll, right? So, you know, depending on how you feel about how important rock and roll is, which, you know, I happen to think that it would be most unusual. And you know what? I wish I was going to be alive for another 100 years. I'd like to know what people are going to think about the 60s in 100 years' time. Be very, very interesting. Anyway, my point is that I doctored the videos, I cleaned them up, I re-showed it to Neil, and now he loves them. So we're off and running. And in my perfect world, and I have no idea whether this is going to happen at all, I would love CSNY to go out in 2014, 40 years, and play some incredible old music and some incredible brand new music. I think that we've got a long way to go.
You know, someone who did read the book is David Crosby, and you showed it to him just because, obviously, as you were explaining before, you know, there was a slide downward that is described in very gripping terms. You know, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you know, how David responded when you showed him those sections and the conversation that you had about it.
I had 2 main concerns. My wife, Susan, and Crosby. The only call that I got from legal at the publishers was of this story I told in the book of David. And they called me one day and they said, look, please, you've got to make sure that this is absolutely true. This story is so whacked. You've got to make sure. We don't want to open ourselves up for lawsuits or anything like that. So I called David and I told David what I wrote, what I read in the book. I read in the paragraph that Anton is referring to. And it was this. One day in the height of David's madness, he sold his Mercedes for cocaine to a dealer. The dealer OD'd. And while he was dead in the bed, Crosby broke into his house and stole his pink slip back to the Mercedes. And they wanted to know, this is so whacked, I make sure this is true. So I called David.
How would you make something like that up?
Hey. We're songwriters, we can make anything up.
That's some of the new material that we'll be listening to.
So I told Crosby what I'd written, and he said, hey, do not change a word. I did it. I'll totally own up to it, what I did. I was crazy. I did put you guys through insanities. Oh, and one more thing before you get off the phone. I resold the car for cocaine. That's the story Anton is referring to.
You know, Graham, since we're here in New York, I wonder, you know, there are some lovely New York stories in the book, you know, particularly like when you first were coming here with the Hollies, and I wonder if you could just describe your response to the city and, you know, some of the experiences you had back then.
I see America differently than you do. Majority of you are Americans. I'm not from here, so I see it differently, right? The phone rang exactly like it did in the John Wayne movies, right? You could order food to be taken out and delivered to you. Are you kidding? We couldn't even get a fucking hamburger in the north of England. We couldn't. It was insane. We got to New York. a man called Morris Levy, who owned Roulette Records, was putting on a show at the Paramount Theater here in Times Square, the Soupy Sales Easter Show, right? This is, I think, Easter of 1965. And we'd had some visa problems, you know. There was a thing between the Musicians' Union between England and America where you had to prove to each union, whether you were going from America to England or from England to America, you had to prove to the union that you were the only one capable of doing that job, right? Nobody else could, you weren't taking anyone's job away if you were in it, right? Anyway, we had some problems, and we didn't arrive until about 11 o'clock in the morning of the first show. We get down to the Paramount. Bob Levine, he's the stage manager there. He says, okay, which 2 songs are you doing? I said, what? 2 songs? Aren't we doing like a 45-minute set of Dynamite? You know? No, 2 songs. But there's another 11 acts on the bill, and they're all doing 2 songs, and there's 5 shows a day. It was astounding to be here. I would walk along, you know, Times Square, and I'd see that camel blowing giant smoke rings out of the thing, you know? It was astounding to me. You could buy a steak for $1.59? Are you kidding?
Tad's.
Yeah, Tad's Steakhouse, exactly. Yeah. There was a lot of Johnny Carson on this little black and white TV in the hotel room. This was a great country. And I'm really proud. I've been an American citizen now for over 30 years. I did not want to be hypocritical. I didn't want to be criticizing this government or praising this government, because of course the government does some great things occasionally. It's not all bleak. It looks pretty shitty right now, but it's not all bleak, you know. I can speak my mind here. Half of the shit that me and David and Stephen and Neil have gotten into, we couldn't do it in a different country. We'd either be in jail or, you know, disappeared. We live in America. No one has to agree with anything that we say. But my God, do we have the right to say it. And I'm so pleased.
You know, on that very subject, another New York aspect, you know, on a more recent trip, you know, you went down to Occupy and, you know, performed some songs. And I wonder if you could, you know, kind of talk about what you experienced down there and what that meant for you and why you went.
When the Occupy movement started, David and I were on tour in Europe. And we would mention, we heard what was going on, and we would mention it every single night and tell the people that we couldn't wait to get off the road so we could go down and support these people. And it used to get a round of applause every single night in Europe, right? It's obvious what's going on here. We know that this is bread and circuses to the nth degree. Now, we know that the Romans are supposed to have invented bread and circuses, but it's probably been going on for 1,000 years before that. Give the people something to eat, give them something to look at, like Kim Kardashian's ass, and let them all lie down and be sheep so we can sell them another, you know, pair of sneakers and another soft drink, and we can rob them. That's what's going on here. We are completely controlled by our media. You can count the people that own the world's media on 2 hands. Do you think they want protest songs on their airwaves? Not at all. And so a lot of people say to me, where's all the protests gone? If you go to Neil Young's Living with War website, there's over 3,000 protest songs on that site. But you won't see any of them in the media. Oh no, they want the status quo to keep going. They want to make sure that nobody rocks the boat. But man, I'm in a band with 4 incredible boat rockers.
I think we may be ready to take some questions from the audience. So
Definitely. So if you'd like to raise your hands, I can take some questions. I'll bring you a microphone. So, okay, you got it first.
You can't keep it though.
Pardon me.
Hi, I was wondering if you might talk about the Muse concerts, and just as a side note, will we ever see the No Nukes movie on DVD?
In 1977, I had the pleasure of having dinner with Jacques Cousteau, one of my heroes. Also, the man my wife has an incredible crush on, or when he was alive anyway. She's still waiting for me to get old so I can look like Jacques, right? So, at dinner, I asked him, I said, Jacques, what do you think is humanity's greatest problem? And quite frankly, I'm expecting a fish answer, right? Because it's Jacques Cousteau, for God's sake. So I'm expecting whales and the ocean and the plastic and the pollution and the and Jacques looks at me and he goes, nuclear police. And I said, I don't get that. What do you mean, nuclear police? He said that he foresaw a time in America where police would be able to come to your door without a warrant to check to see if you had any nuclear fissionable material. And then he went on to explain, you know, what was upsetting him, and the way he described it was as the nuclear industry was like a snake, with at the head all the miners dying from the radon poisoning, to the transportation, to the processing of the nuclear, to the building of the nuclear power plants, and you know how ungreen they are, to the terrorist activity, to the transportation going through villages, you know. And he explained all this to me. After 3 Mile Island happened, me and Jackson and Bonnie and James Taylor and John Hall decided that we were going to try and bring as much awareness of this nuclear problem to the people as possible. And we decided that if we were going to do it, we were going to have to do it big. So we decided, quite, you know, naively, to put on 5 shows at Madison Square Gardens, and we'll do a rally for, you know, 250,000 people at Battery Park on the day after the concerts. And my God, we pulled it off. There were some incredible artists on the No Nuke show. I don't know if anybody saw any of them, but there was some. Did you? Yeah? Is that right? You were the one shouting more. I know you, yeah. We can't take credit for any of this, but you've got to realize that since the No Nukes concert, there hasn't been one nuclear power plant built in the United States. That's the power of bringing awareness to people. And fortunately, I think the nuclear industry is starting to crumble. I think people are getting aware of the dangers of it. They're beginning aware that it's not an energy that is too cheap to meter. They're becoming aware of the embrittlement process because these plants are over 40, 50 years old in some cases. We've managed to help shut down Yankee. We've managed to help shut down San Onofre in California. We're heading for Diablo Canyon. And about a year and a half ago, the Muse board put on another incredible concert, which is going to be in the same place as the bridge benefit that we're going to do. And so a year and a half ago, we realized that we've got to get new bands into this. This can't be just me and Jackson and Bonnie and James doing it all the time, right? We have to get new bands. We have to get the Fleet Foxes. We have to get Jason Mraz. We have to get Jonathan Wilson. We have to get these new bands fired up because it is affecting their lives and their lives of their children and their children's children. I see the nuclear power industry crumbling. I think people are getting hip to the amount of money that's being made, to the bullshit that they're telling you that it's all safe. Oh yeah, really? You know, they just found a bloody bluefin tuna off the coast of San Diego full of plutonium from Fukushima. Insane. The shit that you don't know. Media control. We wanted to do a movie of the No Nukes concerts, but we didn't have the money. A friend of ours, Joe Smith from Warner Brothers, said that he could probably get Warner Brothers to pay some money for us to make the movie. Will it be on television? I don't know, but I'll tell you something. There was a lot of footage and a lot of recordings, great ones, not used because, you know, we could have made a 6 vinyl set of it, but instead it was what, 3, I think? Yeah, so there's a lot more to come, and we could, you know, revitalize it and redo it and digitally enhance it and make it all beautiful again. I still think the message has to go out there, and I'm so proud of places like Germany. They've shut down every single one of their nuclear power plants. They're going totally on renewables. Japan, because of Fukushima, have had to shut down theirs. And Japan's not like disappearing. Germany's not going to disappear. Oh, if you don't have nuclear power, you're all going to crumble. It's all bullshit. It can be done, and it will be done. Take my word for that.
Hi, Graham. Do you miss the north of England?
Do I miss England?
The north of England.
You know, I couldn't wait to get out of Manchester. The first thing you do as a musician is you want to conquer not only your family and your friends, but the local area, right, in Manchester. And if you're successful, the next thing you want to do is conquer London. And if you're successful at that, then you want to go to America, you know. Do I miss the north of England? No, absolutely not. I don't even miss... Sometimes I feel like I'm just this brain on a stick. I don't care where I am. I don't need my coffee to be a certain temperature. I don't need it to be absolutely real butter on the table. I exist in here. And I don't miss the north of England at all. Is it an incredible place to have come from? Absolutely. Did I learn a lot about my life from the way that we dealt with, you know, maybe your house tomorrow won't exist? Maybe your friends are going to be dead tomorrow? It's a very firm reality when I was growing up. In a way, I think that if America would have been bombed like Europe was, we'd have a far different attitude towards preemptive war. We just have never been bombed that much.
Wonderful. I think we have time for 2 more questions. We'll take one from the middle. We'll take one from the back.
Reading the book, I couldn't stop wondering about if there was any fallout from certain people. I mean, for example, some of your co-Hollies, you say that you couldn't stand their provincial pub mentality anymore. I mean, they didn't get a little bit cross?
I don't care. I'm telling you, in the acknowledgement page for my book in the back is the last sentence. It says, "This is how I remember it." Because we all have our own truths. Stephen Stills to this day doesn't know where we first started singing together. He thinks it was Cassie's kitchen. And it wasn't at all. It was Joni's living room. And me and David are so emphatically clear about it. But we all have our own truths, right? So, you know, the one thing about the book that I can say that I really like is that it's done.
I think the other response, you know, to that idea is, you know, you're tough on yourself in the book. You know,
I'm tough on myself. I was telling this lady, I'm my own worst critic. You've got, you know, things have got to get past this filtering system that I have within myself. Yeah, I'm tough on myself, so what?
So you're tough on other people too.
Yeah, so what?
Exactly. I have one last question.
Wonderful. We have time for one more back there.
In terms of your political activism, how did that come about? And
I get pissed off when I don't see things that I agree with. I do. Bradley Manning is a perfect example. You know? That's not fair to me. In a way, I don't even... Do you know who Bradley Manning is? Yeah, okay. In a way, I don't even care whether he's guilty or innocent. I know that it's not fair. Constitutionally, we're all entitled to a speedy, fair trial. That means usually about 100 to 120 days before you're brought to trial. Bradley Manning was in terrible, terrible conditions that even the United Nations said bordered on torture for 1,000 days before he was ever brought to trial. The people that lied us into the Iraq War, George Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, Richard Pearl, Wolfowitz, all those people, they're all walking free. They're all going to Starbucks. Bradley Manning, because he tried to tell us the truth, is in jail for the next 35 years of his life. Does that sound fair to you? So it's my sense of fairness, and it started when my father was sent to jail because he bought a camera from a friend of his at work, and he wouldn't tell the police who'd sold him the camera. He went to jail for a year. It broke his heart. He was dead at 46. I get upset when things aren't fair. I'm a very reasonable man. But let's be fair, you know? That's why, you know, and am I political? I don't know. When you write Chicago, like I did, about Bobby Seale being bound and chained and gagged and it being called a fair trial, bullshit. When we start slaughtering our own kids like we did at Kent State, and, you know, to this day, no one's ever apologized to the family of those kids that died. When we're starting to kill our own children, is that a political statement? No, it's a bloody human statement. When Stephen, you know, saw the riots on Sunset Boulevard and wrote For What It's Worth, that's not political. That was people getting beat the shit out of on the street. When Robert Kennedy was assassinated and Crosby wrote Long Time Gone, that's not a political statement. That's one of us was slaughtered. We're not a political band. We're a human band.
Well, thank you all very much. Thanks to Graham Nash.
That was all very beautifully said. Thank you so much to Graham and Anthony for joining us this evening. Thank you all for being here as well. If you haven't checked out a copy of Wild Tales, please do.